In Beethoven's A major sonata, I have to play an E major scale through 2.5 octaves, very evenly, moderately fast. A few measures later, my colleague at the piano has the same task, unhampered, it seems, by problems of string crossings and shifts. My pride as a cellist is at stake. The pianist's even articulation must be matched. There will be many more instances in the outer movements where the two instruments have to attain equal smoothness. Evenness will remain the key word for scales. No other musical configuration resents bumpiness as much as the scale. Everything that has been said about the meticulous equalization of touch within positions and feather-light inaudible shifts is here put into the service of creating a succession of perfectly matched sounds. Advisedly, I left the study of scales appear quite late in my exercises. A sequence of many position changes on one string, with distances varying frequently on shifts and within positions, amounts to one of the most difficult tasks a string player has to face. Take the opening measure of Grützmacher's C major etude. The shifts are successively on a half step, then twice on whole steps. Within the 4 positions, there are first 2 whole, then 2 half steps from the first to the second finger. If I use the printed fingering, there will be 6 positions with that many more changes. What a lot of adjustments to be made for only 12 notes. What I said about the scale in thirds also holds true here. I must move horizontally with the arm, but think of the finger placement vertically. 3 notes to each group for the first fingering. To begin with, one would do well to practice only the first fingers. In each position, all the fingers are spaced at once, but a firm contact is established separately, one by one. I can learn a few generally valid points at the end of this simple scale. To wit, the faster I play, the lighter the touch of the fingers will be, and the smaller the initial distance from the string. At a rapid speed, the fingers will neither hit nor squeeze the string, but just drop rhythmically onto their places. Also, shifts into thumb position must be made with the thumb already up on the fingerboard. Like all passages, scales will become smoother when we vary musical accents and practice them forward and backward. We put the scale through the blender in this way, and lo and behold, the bumps disappear. Shifting frequently in the same direction poses a special problem of remembering the pitch with which one has to stay in tune. This is why I deal with pitch memory in the first section of Chapter K, the scale chapter. Relying on a succession of seemingly correct intervals of a second creates the same hazard as laying a row of bricks very carefully and finding out after a while that one has failed to remain perfectly level. To prevent this, the bricklayer stretches a cord over the whole wall. The cellist, on his part, must relate every note to the root of the scale, lest he forget his key. On page 42, I use an open G to act as a pitch reminder in a G major scale. The same can be done with an open C in a C major scale. Both permit the thumb to remain on the string in high positions, whereas the intermittent use of the open A in an A major scale forces us to lift the arm after every note of the scale. But that is good practice for the free entrances in Bach's Sixth Suite. Erecting the girders that frame a key, I then practice scales stressing all tonic and dominant notes. Then tonic and subdominant. Then each tonic. Every other tonic. And finally, only the bottom and top notes. There is no such thing as one good fingering for any scale. Sometimes the use of open strings is all right, sometimes it is interruptive. One may wish to go to a bright string as soon as possible or remain on the lower one longer and cut down on the number of shifts on the same string. Triplets often benefit from being fingered in groups of three, and indeed all musical stresses will influence the placements of shifts. I've indicated three different patterns on pages 43 and 44. The first one using low positions as much as possible, but no open strings. The second fingering, finishing the second octave on a high finger on the D string, playing the third octave in position across to the A string. The third pattern, starting on the thumb and staying in position for each of the first three octaves. By playing the first fingering with the use of open strings, a fourth option is added. Other possibilities will present themselves when they become advantageous in certain rhythmic and tonal context. But the four above give us a good start when they are all practiced in turn. In the Grützmacher etude, I stressed the need for evenness in a scale on one string. Now we shall also have to achieve it while crossing strings. The bow must, of course, always approach the new string's angle and level as smoothly as possible. In the left hand, we shall lash out in a slow tempo toward the new position, never opening the hand more than the unchanged profile of the playing finger and its free vibrato permit. With increasing speed, the hand will open from the last note on the old string toward the first note on the new string, the thumb moving to a position where it can act as a pivotal support for the stretch or leap. In a legato singing passage, I try to avoid string changes on half steps as much as possible, not only because of the greater distance from the old to the new finger, but also because the melodic attraction of the two notes in a semitone resent a change of timbre. After becoming familiar with all major and minor scales, one should also practice the whole tone scales listed on page 45. And the chromatic scales, which one can group either in triple or quadruple meter. When we play them in triplets, the shifts will occur on the notes of a diminished seventh chord. When we group them in four, the shifts occur on the notes of an augmented triad. Before going on to scale bowings, I would like to insert here a word about fluency in scales and in left-hand technique in general. There are people who have the tendency to let their fingers run away. They need to learn the equalization of finger weight and playing in strict tempo and rhythm. But an altogether different problem, much more difficult to overcome, is the fear of playing fast. Psychologically, this inhibition can be attacked by performing some parts of a scale or passage very fast before settling down on some comfortably slow notes. By thus alternating spurts and periods of relaxation, a sense of potency can be created that would otherwise be unattainable. If we can rest on every other note, for instance, perhaps we can bring ourselves to be really swift in between. Four comfortable notes followed by four fast ones can be the next step. And so on to fewer slow and more fast notes. Mechanically, the ability to group notes is, of course, of the essence in all fast passages and is also the cornerstone of good sight reading. The aforementioned habit of quickly defining the compass of each position instead of climbing laboriously from note to note is very helpful. And so is the insistence on equal precision in placing and lifting fingers. Practice this in scales as you did before with broken thirds without the bow. It is very profitable to use scales for the practice of bowings, both for the coordination and the independence of the two arms, so that all bowings may be practiced with clarity of sound at the top through 4 octaves. I suggest on page 69 that the highest keys from G through B should begin on their dominants. On pages 69 through 71, I have compiled a sequence of fundamental bowings. More can be found attached to the Motu Perpetuo on page 78 and as part of the scale chapter on page 47. In part 3 of our series, we already practiced many single strokes on open strings. Beginning with the sustained ones, we can now incorporate into our scale practice the grand détaché, using the whole bow. and the détachés in the upper and lower half and the middle of the bow. I would especially advise very careful work on the détaché in the upper middle. It represents the most often used non-legato bowing on the string, particularly in Baroque music. Combining short legatos with détaché strokes, we can practice various foursomes, like 2 notes slurred, 2 detached, or with the legato notes at the end or in the middle. All of them should have only one musical accent on the first of every 4 notes. Since we often observe that detached notes receive too little bow length when they alternate with longer bow strokes, we should practice each foursome first with a whole bow on the legato notes and a full half bow on each detached note to free the forearm motion in the upper half and the whole arm in the lower half. Then we can practice them faster around the middle of the bow. Single strokes of varying length can include bowings like 1/4 followed by 6/8 notes. One quarter and 4/16. And especially useful, 8th notes alternating with 2/16. The dactyl, long, short, short, occurs not nearly as often as the anapest, short, short, long. In a fluent tempo, the execution of the anapest will mean a let up on the long note and a steady motion and pressure from the short notes into the long ones, as for instance in Bach's 3rd Gamba Sonata. When the main note is even longer than twice the length of the upbeats, we may arrive near the tip for the short notes. It is then vital that we have the power to anticipate the uppow's strength on the preceding short notes. This will be necessary at the beginning of the Dvorak concerto. Or the Lalo concerto. In all these cases, the flamboyant entrance on the first long note precludes starting on an upbow, but enough power can be generated by aiming at a spot several inches from the tip, using the full hair, leaning with the dead weight of the arm on a pronated hand, and then drawing the bow freely. Bowing patterns where at a given bow speed, the pressure has to be lightened to prevent heaviness on the subordinate part of a phrase are indicated on page 47. All of these require very smooth bow changes, as we must not permit every change to turn into an accent. When the dependent notes still sound too heavy, we may have to tack them on to the long notes. An example of this occurs in the first Beethoven symphony. We start by hooking in pianissimo and unhook during the crescendo to forte. The second Brahms symphony probably benefits from hooking, since the theme is marked piano cantabile. But the expansive spirit and forte marking in his third piano trio inclines me toward the use of severed bows. Among the many possibilities of playing a varying number of legato notes in one bow stroke, I singled out 4 slurred notes at moderate tempo for the daily calisthenics. The need to cultivate an evenness of sound through steady bow speed and pressure and an uninterrupted vibrato makes work on this bowing a daily must. Turning to abrupt single strokes, we deal with 5 different means of production. The slowest speed is served well by the so-called martelet stroke. The derivation from marteau, the hammer, is only justified by the acoustical similarity. Mechanically, it is much closer to the bow and arrow, since all the effort goes into the preparation and the action itself is a release. The martelet needs time for 3 phases. First, the firm setting of the bow. Second, drawing at maximum speed while the pressure is relaxed. And third, coming to a standstill with no weight at all. When one neglects the setting, the sound will be cradled. Not drawing swiftly enough will choke it, and any weight at the end will blunt it. The martelet can be an incisive, very clear stroke at any dynamic level and should be practiced in all parts of the bow. A good whole bow martelet is an excellent manifestation of fine bow control. Let your arrow fly straight and true. As the tempo increases, there won't be time for 3 distinct phases on each note, and we must go next to a stroke in the lower third that bites into the string from a soft initial contact and ends up in the air. We discussed this in part 3. With the next faster tempo, the possibility of a preliminary setting of each note no longer exists, and we come to a non-stop stroke in the lower half that bites into the string at the nadir of a flat arch. The last movement of the E minor sonata by Brahms may use such a stroke. When the weight of the arm near the frog hinders the production of still faster short notes, we move toward the middle of the bow. The many possibilities of varying the character of thrown and launched strokes were detailed in part 3. Compound chiseled strokes can be used in Beethoven's Archduke trio and in the scherzo of his first Razumovsky quartet. In some sequences, a ricochet combination of several short notes works better than bowing back and forth. The ricochet bowing is initiated by the arm. The energetic attack must be set up carefully, but the bow grip remains quite loose. It can be played on a down bow, as in the last movement of the Britten sonata. Or on an up bow, as in the Valentini sonata. As in chapter B, the launch stroke is developed in the scale bowings on page 70 from a small rubbing détaché stroke. The seamless sequence of the 5 kinds of short notes can then be presented in this way. And now to the hitherto undiscussed continuous arm strokes with intermittent accents. Everybody can learn the portato in 10 minutes. All we have to think about is that we superimpose on a continuous pianissimo stroke accents of varying length and intensity that are produced by the fingers. Again, I want to invoke that winged feeling that allows the arm to draw the bow freely and to move into and out of contact with the string at will. This sensation persists in the soft staccato, just a bit more separated than the portato. And in the flying staccato, where the bow is poised very slightly above the string and creates little droplets of accents on each note, as in Beethoven's variations in E flat. Or in Max Reger's Third Suite. The hard staccato at letter Q on page 70 is meant to denote a stroke where the bow is set firmly into the string and the notes are released from it rather than onto it, as in the flying staccato. Although its character is light, the first movement of the Locatelli sonata falls for me into the hard staccato category. I see students having difficulty with this piece mostly when the bow flounders with not enough basic contact. All of the foregoing strokes have in common that there only is one arm impulse at the beginning of each group, and then we go. We lose control of the arm movement when we give the bow a second push. With increasing speed, the bow length on each note diminishes. As the bow becomes almost stationary in the so-called nervous staccato, holding it in place with a rigid upper arm and letting the fingers do the articulating seems to work well. The wrist has nothing to do with this stroke. Whereas anything up to the speed required in Martinuz's Paganini variations. Or the Dvorak concerto. These can be learned by most people. Experience tells us that a really fast staccato depends a good deal on a special knack to make it sound even and brilliant. But everybody will profit from persistent work at letters S and T, at least to the extent that it will sharpen bow reflexes in general. Anyone who is suddenly called upon to perform the pizzicato sections of the Debussy or Ravel quartet will agonize over uncalloused fingertips. A short time spent on exercises V and W every day will keep us prepared for such contingencies. And this is, of course, what all these exercises are supposed to do for us, to make us feel prepared and secure in our craft, so that we may work on our repertoire with joy and confidence.